The topic of creative writing is vast and seemingly never-ending. I wanted to start a small mini-series touching on different aspects of creative writing, looking at what works and what doesn't. Today, we will focus on characters and character descriptions. Please note that this is a general discussion and what works for one person may not work for you. If this sounds interesting to you, consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Before we get into today's topic, let's start with a basic understanding of what creative fiction is. Creative writing is commonly defined with 4 categories: fiction, creative non-fiction, poetry, and script writing. Each type of creative writing has its own conventions and features. Most creative writing revolves around some sort of characters, setting, plot, or theme. Fiction is a genre of writing that is created from the imagination rather than being based on fact. It includes stories that are not true but rather are fabricated by the author. Some key characteristics of fiction can be that the content relies heavily on the author's creativity to create a world that may or may not resemble our own. Fiction typically involves a story with characters, a plot, and setting. Fiction is a powerful tool for exploring the human experience and imagination. Script writing is considered a form of creative writing because it involves the imaginative construction of a narrative through dialogue and action. While it differs from traditional prose or poetry in its focus on visual storytelling, it shares many of the same elements. In essence, script writing is a form of creative writing that combines elements of storytelling, character development, and visual communication. It offers a unique and challenging way for writers to express their creativity and share their stories with a wider audience. Creative non-fiction is a genre of writing that uses literacy techniques, like those found in fiction, to tell true stories. It's essentially a blend of storytelling and journalism, focusing on factual events but employing creative elements to make the narrative more engaging and impactful. It offers readers a unique blend of factual information and imaginative storytelling. Poetry is considered creative writing because it uses figurative language and other literacy devices to create striking images in the reader's minds. It often employs traditional elements like rhyme and meter, but modern poets may experiment with more unconventional forms. Now that we have a better understanding of what creative writing is, we can start looking into what makes it good or not so good. Let's get into the main topic of this first episode by talking about character descriptions. A story can be made or broken on the back of its characters. Let's take an example of what I would consider a poorly written character description. Sarah was a beautiful girl with long, flowing hair and piercing blue eyes. She has a heart of gold and always smiled, even in the toughest of times. She loved to read and write, and her favourite colour was pink. So why would this be considered poorly written? To begin with, it's overly generic. This description is quite vague and it doesn't really provide any unique or memorable qualities. The description also has a lot of cliches. The phrases heart of gold, piercing blue eyes, always smiled are common cliches and they don't really add any depth to the character. When a description is heavily overused, it starts to lose its importance. Finally, there is a lack of conflict or complexity in this description. In this context, Sarah is perfect. She is without any flaws or struggles, but it also makes her very one-dimensional and uninteresting. Instead of simply listing positive traits, try to show the character in action. For example, Sarah's laughter echoed through the library as she flipped through a well-worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. Her bright eyes sparkled with a mischievous glint as she imagined herself in Elizabeth Bennet's shoes. This description provides more specific details about Sarah's interests and personality, and hints at a potential conflict of challenges she may later face. I know I bring up these books a lot, but it's not without reason. If you want an example of an incredible character description, I always look to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I'll play a short excerpt from one of his books. You might recognise it.
Miss Morstan entered the room with a firm step and an outward composure of manner. She was a blonde young lady, small, dainty, well-gloved, and dressed in the most perfect taste. There was, however, a plainness and simplicity about her costume which bore with it a suggestion of limited means. The dress was a sombre, greyish beige, untrimmed and unbraided, and she wore a small turban of the same dull hue, relieved only by a suspicion of white feather in the side. Her face had neither regularity of feature nor beauty of complexion, but her expression was sweet and amiable, and her large blue eyes were singularly spiritual and sympathetic. In an experience of women which extends over many nations and 3 separate continents, I have never looked upon a face which gave a clearer promise of a refined and sensitive nature. I could not but observe that as she took the seat which Sherlock Holmes placed for her, her lip trembled, her hand quivered, and she showed every sign of intense inward agitation.
I love the use of his language. I truly feel like I can see this person as he describes them, and not just their physical appearance, but who they are. It doesn't matter how tall or short your character is, it's their personality and flaws that engage readers. If you are struggling with character descriptions, feel free to write what you know about them in dot points. Here are a few things to consider to help you flesh out your character. What do they excel in? What are their insecurities? What are your character's mannerisms? How do they react to conflict? What are their flaws? If they've had past trauma, how might it affect their current behaviour? You want to try and combine a healthy amount of strengths and weaknesses. This can vary by genre and plot, but what I mean is, if your character only succeeds or only loses, it can make them unreliable and flat. If your character is too dysfunctional or too perfect, it takes away any sympathy from the reader. Think about your own favourite character from your own favourite book. What is it about them that draws you to them? Trust that the readers of your story don't need every little detail spelled out for them. For most situations, writing out every single aspect of a character's history and backstory in the first chapter can really rob any connection or mystery. A slightly off-topic example that came to mind when I was writing this script was actually the character of Boba Fett. This character was adored when he first appeared in movies, comics, and books, but as he became overused and people learnt more about him, the less interested people actually became. And finally, when writing visual descriptions of characters and conversations, it's important to remember that there are also a lot of cliches here too.
His lips curved into a smile, his eyebrows raised. He raised one eyebrow. His lips curved into the suggestion of a smile. He smirked, he leered. He looked like he was maybe about to smile, but then he didn't. His eyebrows shot into his hair. He wiggled one eyebrow. He wiggled both eyebrows. He wiggled all his eyebrows. He smirked again. He opened his mouth to say something, but then closed it again. He cocked one eyebrow, smirking. He frowned. He blinked. He smirked and raised one eyebrow. He schooled his features into neutrality. His eyes glinted, his eyes shone, his eyes gleamed. His eyes twinkled as he lifted one eyebrow and curved his lips into the suggestion of a smile, but then he realized people were watching him, so he quickly rearranged his features into something normal so he didn't look like an absolute lunatic.
Sorry, I just had to throw that one in here. I find this woman hilarious. These descriptions and others like it are something I will be getting into a bit more in depth in a later episode. This is an expression that you may have heard before: show, don't tell. Try to use vivid descriptions and actions to reveal your character's traits, emotions, and qualities. Remember, creative writing is about the journey, not the destination. The more you practice and experiment, the better you will become. We've just scratched the surface today, and I intend to post the next episode of the mini-series on plot building. Thanks for sticking around. Until next time.